Awesome. Carrie Gress, it is so awesome to see you and to be with you today. How are you?
Well, thank you. It's so great to be with you. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just telling you before, and I think a lot of people who follow us and listen to us know that Emily and I, my fiance, we've been doing a book club together throughout this year. And so we've actually picked different themes. Like we did Ben Shapiro's How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps in January. We've done one on theology of the body. We've done we did Dave Ramsey, Total Money Makeover, all the
Nice.
kind of different areas and pillars that we try to hit on in seeking excellence. And so we picked Anti-Mary Exposed in June. I think in June or May, maybe it was April. Emily also got all the Theology of the Home books and things like that too. So she was on a
Oh,
Carrie Gress kick there for a while. And we got to read
that's so
Anti-Mary
great.
Exposed, and it was just amazing. And so, as somebody who I like to speak on the difficult topics or the controversial things. The book is basically every page is filled with those things.
It's a pretty intense book, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I'm super curious, to just kind of get kicked off before we even get to like the contents of the book. It's just like, what was like your lead up to writing it? Like, what was kind of the
Yeah.
inspiration in your journey to feeling like
Um,
you need to write it?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great company to be in, obviously, as far as your book club. But yeah, this was a book that when I was writing the book, The Marian Option, it was just really clear to me when I was looking at Our Lady, and here she is, the most painted woman in the world, the most revered woman throughout all of history. Even National Geographic has called her the most powerful woman in the world. And I was looking at women in our culture, and I was like, wait a minute, the women in our culture aren't at all like Our Lady. And it's not like they were just kind of moved a little bit away from, Catholic principles or something, but they've turned everything really on its head. All the things that Our Lady stands for are not what, the culture is living at this point. It's because of elite women in the culture. And so anyway, it was really interesting to sort of look into that and see, like, this hasn't been a blip. This isn't just sort of some fashion trend that started at some point, but this has been an ongoing, steady reality really since the late 60s. And I just wanted to get into the roots of that and see, like, what's behind all this. So I have a chapter actually in The Marian Option where I say, are we in the age of Mary or the anti-Mary? And then my publisher, Tan Book, said, why don't you do a book just on the anti-Mary? And I was like, sure, why not?
Mhm.
Still at that stage where I had so much energy to write books. And I signed the contract, and I was like, oh my goodness, what if there's not enough content? And of course, the content is just everywhere. In fact, it was really interesting. I think I researched it for 2 years, and let me tell you, it was so nice to not be researching it anymore, because there was
Oh,
so
I
much
bet.
dark content. And of course, a friend of mine said, once you see the anti-Mary, you can't unsee it. So I still, have an eye out for it and paying attention to what's happening with it, all the developments and whatnot. But so the big question though in my mind has been, obviously, this connection between Mary and the anti-Mary in the culture. And, by anti-Mary, I don't mean an individual, I mean a spirit, not sort of like the Antichrist or the spirit of the Antichrist that St. John writes about in one of his letters. So I think the spirit of the anti-Mary has really taken hold of women in the culture. And, the thing that amazes me most is just to look at the statistics about women and to see how miserable so many women are in the culture. And yet that is
Right.
a detail that gets so kind of swept under the carpet. So that's what, was really the big motivation for this book was, we know really what makes women happy, and what, every being is made for a specific end. Obviously, we're made to be in heaven with God and to know and love and serve him. But there's that comes down to a very personal aspect for all of us. We all have a very personal way of doing that. And so many women have just really bought into this. And I think the hardest part is that they don't even realize they have bought into it, because it's just been so pervasive that this is just how we think women operate. So, or this is how women are supposed to function, or this is how women are made happy. And yet again, the statistics are telling us that this isn't working. So those are really the motivations for it. And I think also, I lived this spirit for a long time too. I was definitely a very practicing Catholic. I went to mass on Sunday, and that was sort of it until I got to college. And then I had all these different forces, tugging at me. whether it was a hookup culture or, I had a grandmother who was involved in the New Age. And so I was tinkering in that. And anyway, but in the meantime, I knew that the church is really home, but I was so poorly catechized that I just couldn't break through all of that. So I think that was also part of it, was just trying to my whole journey, which is almost every woman's journey in our culture, to try and free ourselves from these very tight bonds that have gripped the way that we think and the way that we live and the way, we think our lives are meant to go. So that was, in a nutshell, kind of how it all started.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. And I'm curious, I've read the Screw Tape Letters multiple times because it's one of my favorite spiritual works by C.S. Lewis. And, he talks about, and obviously it's not the exact same, but he talks about like going through that and like entering into that mindset, how difficult it was for him, and just like what a dark period of his life that was. Was that kind of the joy of being done with the researching? Was just like, it had to just be a lot to be.
And of course, there's a whole section on the occult, and the Lilith section was just really intense because I was always working late at night, and Lilith is, a demon of the night, and I can't tell how many weird things would happen, like car alarms would go off. Our car alarms would go off in our driveway, really? And just strange things like that. 1 a.m, you're like, this is kind of freaky. Why is this happening? So, all of that. There's obviously going to be spiritual warfare in a book like this. But I think, it was just such a huge relief to not have to go back to all these sites and keep researching and just seeing all these terrible things that women are doing that they think is really going to make them happy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. And so, I know that probably part of the spiritual warfare was just, manifest itself in other people and like the opposition that you've had. Yeah. Because I know the book has obviously not been well received by the world, as the world goes. Right.
I love my favorite review, I think, on Amazon is, the 1 star says something. It was during the lockdown. Somebody wrote it and said, this book would be really great toilet paper. Everybody's scrounging around for toilet paper. So anyway, I think that's the winner. But, I take heart in it that I'm making the right people mad. So there's been plenty of resistance for sure.
What was that like for you when you were, I'm sure, like, did you have hesitations before you started, while you were writing, and maybe after you finished it, before publishing it? Were you like, when were you like peak nervous, I guess, or kind of concerned about how people would receive it?
I don't know. The nice thing is I've had enough experience publishing. I've been publishing for probably 10 years now, and maybe longer, but you can't write about the things I write about and not have pushback in the comm boxes and things like that. And, Twitter pile-ons and all those kinds of things. So I was already sort of kind of prepped for what the resistance would be, but, and that the left is really good. They will just ignore something entirely. And then it just kind of goes away. And that was what was kind of happening with it wasn't getting picked up by certain people until it got banned by Facebook and Instagram. They wouldn't allow it to be sold on their marketplaces like 4 days after Biden was inaugurated. And so that actually just brought a whole new, fresh group of readers to this book. And it was one of these great things like, oh, please don't ban my book, because by banning the book, it just made sales go through the roof. And, I was all over. And it was interesting to see what media sites picked me up. Certainly, the normal in the United States, as far as like the Breitbarts and Daily Wire and Federalist and, places like that. But I also got picked up by radio in Hungary, a TV show in Poland. Wow. I was in front of Russia Today, did media with them. So it was interesting to see these former, Soviet countries that know censorship well. These were the ones that were coming, knocking at my door saying, how can this happen? And tell us the story and, all of that. So anyway, so Our Lady has just really done, I know that she's been a part of this book in terms of just helping the right people hear about it, even those that, through these strange media tentacles are now reading it that never would have seen it otherwise. So it's been great.
Absolutely. I feel like, you got to be one of her favorites at this point.
Well, I don't know about that. She knows me on the inside, but it's it's an amazing thing because I think we have such a narrow understanding and view of who she is. And part of that is because of the culture. The culture's been able to paint her as well as us those of us who are faithful to the church, kind of into this corner where we're seen as very, not very bright, kind of doormats, certainly not educated, all of
Right.
these kinds of things. And and our minds are binary, we like on or off, black or white. And so it's hard for us to sort of imagine, you're either hip or you're a doormat. And so I think it's been fun to sort of break out of that mold and say, I don't really fit into the categories that you're trying to box me into, and neither does the Virgin Mother. She's just so much more than most of us imagine. So it's been fun to dig into that. How do I help women understand who she is, more than just this pious statue in our churches?
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Obviously, a great mission, and I'm sure that it does have plenty of challenges. And I like what you referenced, talking about like your personal journey and experiencing what the world was trying to draw you into, as a woman. And so, how do you feel like, writing the book, researching the book, like what were some of the biggest changes in your personal life and
Mhm.
maybe in your motherhood and as a
Right,
wife as you
right.
were getting into all that?
A lot of it actually happened beforehand. It was really a progression because, and it certainly started. I did a master's degree in philosophy, and then I did a PhD in philosophy. And of course, other than um, physics, I don't think you can find a field that has fewer women in it. And
Mm,
so it was always just this dynamic where, you're arguing with people a lot and you're in debate and discussion. And, there's a certain way in which I always felt like I had to sort of present myself to sort of be, tough and right and, compelling and logical. And it was interesting because I noticed that it wasn't working for me. It wasn't like making relationships stronger. In fact, when I encountered other women that were like that all the time, I didn't want to be around them. And so I really had to start asking these questions, what is this really the kind of woman that God has intended me to be? And what's the alternative? And so, while I'm asking what the alternative is, at one point I heard my boss at the time say, oh, that woman, she's just so sweet. And I can imagine, I know it was one of those moments where I was like, sweet. What is sweet? Like, I didn't even know what the word meant in terms of a character quality and whatnot. I just always thought of it in such negative terms. But I was listening at this point, and that's when I really started paying attention. But I also had this string of boyfriends that we would break up and they would go marry a kindergarten teacher, like 4 of them. And so that was the other piece too. Like, okay, kindergarten teachers are very sweet. So it was just this interesting progression of sort of seeing like what happens when I'm kinder and softer and I smile more and I dress differently. I don't have my power suit on, and I'm not trying to be so assertive and outspoken the way that I've been told this since I was a little
right.
girl. First grade, I remember that this is
Wow.
who you're supposed to be. And, I've told this story before, but I think, my favorite moment was about a year later. I was in the metro in DC. I was getting on a train, and some young man who I'd never seen before walked up to me and said, "Are you a kindergarten teacher?" And so I knew I had arrived. That's something had definitely changed. And I never saw him again. I have no idea who he was, but it was just that great question. So I think I had to challenge all of these things in the culture first and really live them in a new way. And then from there, it was really easy to sort of start seeing the picture and the broader strokes once I started seeing it outside of myself, and just the way that women are so highly and heavily influenced by the culture today and this anti-Marian movement that really it controls everything. It controls politics. It controls magazines. It controls the fashion industry, even book publishing, music, all of that. It's all this very exact same messaging that women are getting, and that message is that you're really only going to be happy if, insofar as you are mimicking men, and anything that kind of reflects virginity or motherhood, which of course Our Lady is the Virgin Mother, is really a negative piece in your life that you just need to get rid of. So anyway, it's, yeah, again, one of those long journeys. You can see the Holy Spirit's hands in all of it, but really a beautiful thing to just even see, again, these little incremental changes of what happens when I'm kinder and nicer and warmer, instead of feeling like I'm in a debate all the time.
Right.
So it's a great blessing to have all of those events unfold the way they did.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear too, because I feel, last summer I wrote, it was one of the first things that kind of gave Seeking Excellence, my ministry, a lot of momentum, I guess you could say, is I wrote like a 3-part series on race and from the perspective of faith and everything that was going on last summer after George Floyd died. And
Right.
so it was titled "If Only Life Was Black and White Like Me," and it was a
Mhm.
series of 3 different letters and stuff like that. And it's so interesting because I really feel like I went through a similar process almost of, on the racial side. I used to be like,
Yeah, I
uh,
bet.
yeah, I registered as a Democrat, was super like Team Obama in '08, like was all
Wow.
about all of those things,
Wow.
and
That's amazing.
believed in like systemic
Mhm.
racism in America and all this stuff. And then as I graduated from college, mine, instead of sweetness or going in my gentleness, was more growing in like some of the more American values of like hard work and ownership
Yeah,
and personal responsibility and
right.
those types of things. Like I really started to see like, wait, as I as I apply some of these things that are more traditional or more faith-based and more value-centered, I'm seeing very positive results in my life,
Right.
and
Imagine that.
yeah,
Exactly.
developing
You're
the
right.
life that I want, becoming the man that I hope to be.
Hmm.
And I was like, and I don't buy the stuff that like the world used to sell me about being a victim and having
Yeah.
no future and being oppressed and all this. I was like, I don't see it. And you
Yeah,
realize finally, like there's this boogeyman, that they are always saying is under the bed of this oppression. And I think it goes true for
it
for the
is.
Black community and for women.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what's actually most fascinating was that to see the roots of the anti-Mary. It's Marxism and it's the occult. The occult piece is kind of its own side thing, but the Marxist piece is really this victimhood. I mean, this is exactly what you see in the feminist movement completely, and it's this victimization that then turns into bullying. That actually was the precursor and really the foundation of the LGBT movement, it's exact same principles that have gone on to that movement, and now you can see it leaping exact same ideas again. This victimhood, this rampant Marxism. This let's have this conflict, and with women, it was women against men. With LGBT, it's a whole other spectrum of people that are fighting each other, presumably. But they want to create this conflict, and then of course with race, it's people based on their skin color. So they're trying to create this aggression based on the victimization, but then that victimization turns into a kind of bullying. So it's just these waves that we would never have gotten to critical race theory if it hadn't been for these other two movements. The LGBT movement I actually call the fourth wave of feminism because it's just the exact same ideas. So what's fascinating to me
Yeah.
actually to look at it is to see that there's actually a lot more pushback on critical race theory than there has been on these other movements. And I think some of that, and I'm still trying to work this out in my head, and if you have insights, I'd love to hear them. But I think part of the reason why we're seeing so much resistance to it is because of the fact that it's not usually a man and his wife in a fight, or it's not usually a parent and child fighting each other on these issues, but it's actually something more removed. And it feels like you can
Mm.
actually argue these things instead of being so personal that you're going to like sever relationships within your own family on this issue. So anyway, again, I could be totally mistaken about that, but that's kind of what I'm seeing is that people are willing to speak up about CRT in a way that they weren't previously in these other two areas, even though they're the same um, polemics and problems.
Right.
It
Yeah.
seems.
That's interesting. That's such an interesting perspective on it. I definitely think that there's some, um, yeah, I think that definitely could be one of the possibilities. I think my pessimistic side just says that the only reason that people are standing up more against CRT right now is because it's newer than the other
Yeah,
two.
yeah,
Because I think that you think I'm always entertained when I like listen to Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh and they talk about like Obama and Hillary Clinton being like uh, defenders of traditional marriage, 15 years ago. And
right,
it's
right,
like unbelievable to think of. And like people today, like can't even imagine that. But
right.
like
Of
when
course not.
Obama was literally a senator running for president,
Right.
initially he was against same-sex marriage. And it's
Yep.
just, I think and in that same time period when he was being interviewed and things like that, I'll never forget watching this interview. I think Larry Elder talked about it and showed the clip of him being interviewed. I think it was by Don Lemon of CNN as well,
Oh, wow.
and he's like, do you think if you don't get elected presidents it's going to be because of your race, like that will be
Mhm.
the leading factor? And
Right.
Obama's like, no, I don't think we're there as a nation. I think we're past that. And he's like, if I lose it's probably because I didn't run my campaign very well.
Hmm.
And then
Wow.
you look
Right.
now at like
Right.
CRT and all the things that we have, and
All
it's
about
just,
race. Yeah.
yeah, it's so wild how things have kind of divulged. But I like what
Mhm.
you said there. I think it's really interesting to think of the LGBT movement as, you know, spawning out of feminism. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the waves of feminism and how things
Yeah.
grew and changed. And so you talk about that a lot in the book, but can you give us a little bit of perspective on like where, like, just talk about the beginnings of feminism and like where do you feel like it diverged and really went wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I really zeroed in on the second wave of feminism. The first wave, I'm actually anxious to go back and spend a lot more time researching it, because I think some of it really came out of Protestantism, because Protestantism actually doesn't really know what to do with women, and or at least it's finding a voice and a way to try to integrate them, but it's at its heart it doesn't, because you got rid of Our Lady, they got rid of Our Lady, they got rid of women religious. You know, you now have a pastor who you may or may not be married to, and he's the one that's sort of calling the shots on the way that scripture is read. And so there's not a consistent way that women were understood in Protestantism. And so I think a lot of the reactions of feminism started with that. There's actually another book that I'm hoping to read. I haven't had a chance to, a scholarly book. It was written by a Swedish professor. It's published by Oxford University Press, called something like, where is it? Feminism and Satanism or something like that. And it goes actually back into some deeper roots. So I think that there's a lot more to the story to dig up, but I think that just starting with the second wave of feminism, what we really see it is just this huge Marxist influence. For you know, Betty Friedan sort of kicked things off with her work, and people just were looking for, you know, had this ache with no name that she calls it, and they've just attributed it to being a homemaker, that they just needed more in their life, and that was what was going to fill this ache with no name. Of course, we know that ache with no name is the, you know, the desire of every human heart for God. But Friedan didn't really know her tradition well enough to recognize that as a Jewish woman. But it just set something off. It was sort of this, women were just in this place to sort of start hearing that and comparing themselves to men. And then you see someone like Kate Millett come along. And I did spend a lot of time chatting and getting to know her sister, Mallory Millett. Kate's passed away. But Kate was hugely instrumental, certainly in the, you know, establishing the women's studies programs throughout our universities and whatnot. But she was very much more the intellectual. She was a Marxist. She also had a huge amount of mental illness that she dealt with her whole life. But she's the one that made it really clear that being a woman was actually the best thing that you could be. Lesbian relationships were the height of the womanhood. We didn't need men, and that we had to have abortion in order for you know, all of these things to sort of come together, for women to have this freedom to be, you know, the height of civilization, I guess, and then wisdom and whatnot. Again, it's really mimicking a lot of what, and I lay this out in the book too, a lot of what's happened in the Soviet Union, because they were just trying to get rid of women at home, trying to get, you know, abortion was just rampant. In fact, there were so many abortions, they actually had to like limit them because they were having population issues, sort of like what we're seeing in China now. But the idea was to make women just like men, kind of the cogs in a machine, that they could all just sort of produce at the same amount and do the exact same thing. So the Soviets actually saw this as a negative thing, like, what is this? This isn't who we are. But I think what happened with American women is that they took these ideas and they packaged them so beautifully. They used television and the media just with savvy skills. And they were able to bully people as well. You know, Betty Friedan was very much a bully, and you know, they've just found ways to get their message out. You know, someone like Gloria Steinem, who's very attractive and very articulate and very well put together and just lovely. People wanted to be like her. And so this is how they presented these ideas. But it all really hinged on this idea of abortion. And you can see that, especially when you see, you know, what a difference there is between someone like Kate Millett or Helen Gurley Brown, who started Cosmopolitan, because she was all about just following Playboy. She followed, all, you know, to the letter almost everything the Playboy was doing, but just did it for women. And Kate Millett, you know, is on the other end of the spectrum, much more intellectual and an ideologue. So you can see the two of them, how can these women actually come to agree on anything? And it was really abortion that was sort of the glue that kept the movement together. I think otherwise it probably would have fractioned off in all these different groupings, and we probably wouldn't have seen such a monolithic movement. But abortion was what really brought them together. So they just agreed to not, disagree on that, but they could disagree on everything else. Keep that part quiet, and then and that's really what just kept them together and kept it focused. And you can see that again now, even when there are women who are for the sacredness of marriage and for the sanctity of life. Where are they? They're not anywhere to be seen. And if they are seen, they get treated very, very poorly. Someone like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Candace Owens is probably a great exception. And, it's really a front runner on this. We obviously need more women like her. But yeah, they've done an amazing job of just silencing those that disagree with them.
Yeah, almost impressively. I think, and talking about the break with tradition, I think is really interesting, in how Protestantism really, reshaped, I think, so much of the world's perspective on like the value of tradition, right? And I'm always interested, intrigued, like flabbergasted, like mind blown at like how just far things have drifted from the original, Protestant Reformation. And you look at, I'm just always, like when you compare Lutheranism and Catholicism, how much closer they are than your Elevation Church or Joel Osteen or, some of these mega churches now, evangelicals, compared to Catholicism, right? And just like how much more it drifted further and further away. And I think, and I think it's so interesting, to see these people who find themselves being more conservative and more traditional in those churches, like they have this just like wrestling within themselves of like, what I mean? Like this doesn't, it can't feel right. Like there's just something about it that just doesn't really add up, But I think another big thing that I think you mentioned is, and then that I really learned in reading the book, was the amount of mental illness.
Oh yeah, this was a huge piece that there was a book that came out right when I was about done with my research, by this woman named Phyllis Chesler, who was considered one of the godmothers of the feminist movement. And it was really just, one of those Holy Spirit moments, just dropped in my hands at the right moment. Because I can't even say the name, I don't remember it, but there are parts of it that are just not even appropriate for general audience in terms of the title of the book.
Right.
So you can imagine the contents of the book. There were plenty of things that I just couldn't put in the book because they were just so awful in her book. But she's a psychiatrist. I think she's written a huge number of books, upwards of like 13, maybe even 27, or I can't remember the exact number, but more than 10. And she wrote this book sort of as a tell-all. And in it, she's listing all of these women who, have these names that have been very well revered. And she's talking about the end of their lives and how, she's got mental illness and she's got mental illness and she hates her mom and she hated her mom and her mom was mentally, like, it's just incredible that, these are the women that really are influencing us, who are coming from this incredibly broken place. And Chesler says, we were these lost girls that, prior to the feminist movement really didn't feel at home anywhere. And then all of a sudden we were sort of brought together, and we weren't lost anymore. We had the eye of the camera, with the whole country was watching us. It was just, you can see getting caught up in the excitement of the moment and the movement and this sort of sense of freedom. And as I say all of this, of course, you can see the exact same pattern with the LGBT community, same, all this brokenness that's then combined together and continues to keep breaking people.
Mental illness driven.
What's that?
Especially mental illness driven, especially now with like, transgender, like gender dysphoria and things like that, just normalize mental illness. And like those people who are suffering and struggling with mental illness being the ones who are dictating the rules for society.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it all started with these women in the feminist movement. So that's really, I think, the saddest and scariest part, because we know, broken people break other people. And so it just continues to, the movement just continues to sort of batter and bruise those who are involved with it, because of the fact that it keeps pushing women out of this kind of natural sphere of where they're going to naturally be fulfilled, which is caring for others. And that doesn't have to be in the home. Obviously, there are plenty of single women, even, just look at women religious. they carry others in their prayers and their hearts and, other ways. And this is what women do so well. And yet we don't really talk about this. We don't, in fact, there's this big gap. Like if you try and figure out what's a woman today, and they're actually very funny videos I've linked to in some of my articles. I'd be happy to send you a link of, women talking at the Women's March, like, what is a woman? And the answers are just so sad, but you want to laugh or cry. You're not sure which to do because
Right.
it's so vapid. My favorite is anyone who thinks she's a woman is a woman. So I think that's
Which means it's nothing essentially.
Right. So that's the sad part, is that there really is this great history about who women are, what it is that we do so well, where our real gifts are. And so I dug into the anti-Mary, into some of this, just even ancient mythology, and the language, like anything feminine or things that are feminine are usually things that hold things. So like a ship is always named a she. Women have this capacity, both obviously biologically, which is, our body points to things that are inherent about our souls as well. So we have wombs, and we have, these arms that are made to cradle a baby that, if you as a man cradle a baby, you're going to get tendonitis because your elbows don't bend the way that ours do. Ours are actually, have a curve in them. So we can cradle a baby. We hold, people in our hearts and our minds, and with compassion. So it's this idea of holding things that I think has been completely lost. And so it's been really fun to kind of dig into this and start, rather than just saying, this is what women ought not to do, instead saying, what is it that women really are meant to do? Where are our gifts that are really going to help our lives feel full and valuable, instead of just this constant race to just be like men, which of course, there's nothing, at the end of the day, there can be nothing fulfilling about that. And that's, again, I'm hearing from a lot of women who have lived this feminist narrative. And so many of them say, I wish I'd had children. I wish I had a husband. I wish I'd had more children, even, it just comes up over and over again. Celebrities are talking about it constantly, saying they wish they had more children. So I think it's a sad thing, because it sort of leaves you trapped. And then of course, how Satan works. He's going to come accuse them. Well, it's your fault. So it's just this catch-22 that, we all find ourselves in because of sin. But to have spent your whole life, getting to this point where you think you've done your career and everything right, and then suddenly realize, I don't really have anything. I think that's just incredibly sad and tragic that this is what we've done to women in our culture right now.
Right. And just seeing how backwards your priorities were, things that you fought and sacrificed so many things for.
So many things.
Yeah.
So many things. Exactly.
It's tragic. I think, and there's two other examples that I think I thought of, modern day examples of, talking about the lost women and kind of feeling like they had no place and no direction and no importance in society. It's like, the first person that came to mind was Bernie Sanders when you said that. And I think just a lot of socialists, right? Like, Bernie Sanders or AOC, when you start taking these extreme positions, like they can't even go back on that, because their whole claim to fame is just like radical ideas, right? Radical socialism, communism is kind of bringing that up. And when you look at Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, when you go back and like review their career, it's like everything you've done has been politics. Like your only success in life, all of your money, everything that you've made has been because of politics. So it's like, that's where they found their importance. And so that's when you look, even, looking at former President Obama, when you look at them and you say, okay, they flip flop. And I think it's so interesting how people are like mind blown that they change. Obama used to be against same-sex marriage, and now he's this, he's super LGBT and all this stuff. Like, I find it frustrating, but I'm not surprised by it. It's like, that's literally their whole claim to fame is
it's all a matter of the polls. What are the polls?
So they don't care. Yeah. They don't have any values or any belief in anything actual, there's no principles there.
Yeah. No, it's really, it's got to be very tragic. And that's, I love just thinking about that, asking people that question, what do you want your life to look like when you're 70, 80, 90 years old? What do you want to look back? What do you want to see and have your life look like? And I think that so many people don't think in those terms, and just, again, get washed up in this wave, caught up in this wave of what they're being told they should do, without really critically thinking about, how is this going to affect the rest of my life, especially with women, where we've got this very narrow window of time for our fertility. And most of us spend a very large chunk of it, trying to finish degrees and get jobs and get, promoted and those kinds of things, versus thinking about like, maybe you should just stop right here and have kids and just go with that. So that's always like the secondary thing, like without being the primary thing. So yeah, I think it's incredibly sad what we're doing to women and to families and to husbands too, I think. And that was one of the things I maybe noticed in the book. I was trying to be very gentle on men. I think you've been blamed for everything for 50 years. So I thought, let's just have one book that doesn't blame you. And I actually had some pushback on that.
On not blaming men?
I didn't blame men enough in the book. And
Really?
I explained to this woman, look, every other book has blamed men. So I think we can give them, we can take a little bit of responsibility on ourselves at this point, because we certainly, own a lot of it.
Yeah. And so interesting to think in regards to the world today, and like even like the subtle comments and things, when I started learning more about feminism and how it infiltrated the culture, like one of the silly examples I always look back to was like Everybody Loves Raymond. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. We used to watch it with Seinfeld all the time, my family, and loved the show growing up. But like it was like the classic sitcom where the dad was just an idiot, right? Like the dad husband like couldn't do anything right, and like that's like so prevalent and so common in our culture amongst comedians, even like men like self-deprecating, right? Like I've adopted
every commercial.
Yeah.
If you watch especially daytime shows, if there's a man in it, he's an idiot, and the woman has to come rescue him from his stupid, like he can't diaper a baby,
Exactly. So it's interesting thinking of how like prevalent that's gotten, to then sit there and think like, oh, now let's blame men for things getting this bad. Now that's not me saying that like men didn't have any control or influence over it, you know what I mean? But how do you have both the men are idiots and helpless, and then also be like, let's blame them for the problem?
Yeah, exactly. You can't have both ways, right? And that's the other thing that I'm finding a lot too, is just the amount of resentment that men have towards women. And so I think this book actually helps diffuse some of that, because it shows, so many of us, we just fell into this. There was no, off ramp to say, oh, there's a different way to think, unless a woman has had like an amazing grandmother or just amazing other women in her life who could show her a different way. There's no way to get around it. It's just so prevalent and so common that it's just almost impossible, I think, for a woman to sort of reason herself out of what we're shown as the way to go. And I think that helps men understand, like, okay, this has been like, they've been brainwashed, really. And that I think elicits a certain kind of pity, instead of just this constant anger and resentment that I think so many men feel rightfully towards women, because of just how much tension there is between the sexes, because all of this has been turned up as high, to the highest possible degree, to create this division between us, and then create more of a problem having families and doing those basic things that have built civilization in the past.
Right. Absolutely. So I guess going along with that, this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is like, what do you think men's role in helping to combat the anti-marriage spirit of our age? Where do you kind of see the most effective ways for men to help?
I think that's a really great question. I mean, the first thing obviously is to read the book. And that's been actually a really fun thing, is I didn't really think about men reading this book, but I've had so many people say, my husband and I are reading it together, or, women say, I read so much of it to my husband, at night, that he finally just read it himself because he got tired of me reading him sections of it. And so I think that's been just a great thing to sort of see that dynamic for a husband and wife to be able to talk about these things together. And, maybe that's the place to start, because it's very challenging if you're a man and you're reading this and your wife isn't reading it, because you're going to see these things. Obviously, it's going to help you with compassion and whatnot. But if the two of you can come at it together, then it makes a big difference, because then you have talking points. You have a place to kind of contextualize things. I actually had one man say to me, my wife will never read this book. She's a total liberal, and she's just not going to read this book. And I said, well, why don't you give it to her and just say, I read this book. I really want you to poke the holes in it, which is a great way to both get her thinking, get her seeing a different perspective. And maybe she would poke holes in it all day long. That's fine. But at least it's giving them a place to start as a couple and have a context. And, if she dismisses it out of hand, he's done what he could, but he's going to still obviously recognize it in her life. So But that's, one of the things is that a lot of these things are just so indefensible. I've recently had a conversation with somebody who was trying to tell me that it was just ridiculous that women are less happy now. And I was like, well, I would love for you to share with me some resources on, where this is coming from or why I'm wrong. And of course she didn't have any, but it's just the presumption is there. So I guess that's the other thing that it does is just helps have a conversation with women that don't know where this is coming from. Even if they don't have to mention the name of the book, they can also just have a discussion about it and start. And that's one of the things that I'm a philosopher, so I'm a big fan of asking questions to people because I think it draws things out of them that they don't realize are maybe a mistaken way of thinking. When you hear yourself say something, a lot of times you can notice the problem is much more glaringly than if you just have these ideas sort of as, the muzak in your life, that background noise in your brain. So anyway, I would say that that's another incredible thing to do is to start asking questions to female friends about, why do you do this? Not in an accusatory way or in a way that's even with any loaded answers that you're expecting, but just to sort of start drawing them out to start that conversation and get them thinking about the things that they hold as presuppositions that are mistaken. So yeah, I think that would, and it all has to be done within the context of a relationship. I think,
Right.
we love people, we want the best for them. And that's obviously where people are going to trust you versus, someone showing up and just getting angry with me because they don't know me. And it's easy for them to compare my book with toilet paper. It's a lot different if it's someone that you love and trust and know. So I think that that's another, thing that men have is that relationship already, to be able to start talking about these things without fear, because we know the statistics, everything is kind of on our side. It's just a matter of helping women see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, for me, I think I never really viewed it as like a men's or a woman's book. I never really thought about
Right.
it that way.
Good.
But I think one of the things for me, because I had learned and read a little bit about feminism and things like that before, is I think we, in the church especially, have been influenced by the compartmentalization that the world does of saying,
Mhm.
you're a man, you can't have a thought on abortion. You're white, you can't
Yeah.
have a thought
Yeah.
on, you can't share an opinion on race, right? This goes into so many different things. Well, you're not LGBT, so you can't share a thought on
Yep.
transgender. You've never been transgender. You don't have same-sex attraction. Which then you have all these people coming up with all
There's
these
that
different genders.
victimization. Right. We're the victims. We can talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
nobody else can.
Bullying
Now, me
for-
as a veteran who's been to Afghanistan, I'm always intrigued by times like now where everybody has a
Right.
foreign policy opinion, right? No
Right.
matter whether they've been in the military or been deployed or
Right.
not.
Right.
All the same people who say, I can't speak about abortion will say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about how Afghanistan should have gone down. But so that's always interesting to me. But I do think that is one of the challenges and issues is that men would look and be like, well, I don't need to learn about feminism. I don't need to learn about these things. But it's like, dude, if you're going to be a leader, which you naturally are as a father and a husband,
Right.
in the workplace, in the world, if you're going to be a Catholic, right? If you're going to be a light in the world, then you need to know about these things, right? Like this is, if Carrie Gress is right, and this is literally the spirit that's going against Mary, the queen of heaven, the queen of the church, how can you just disregard that? How can you not
Yeah.
care about these things?
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things that is really interesting is that there have been certain places that have dismissed it. Oh, it's just a woman's book or woman's issue. Well, sorry, if you want to get rid of abortion, the people that you have to meet are the women that are going into the abortion facilities. Like it's one thing to talk about this abstractly, but if you're not willing to actually address the very women who are vulnerable and are the ones that are aborting their children, where do you think it's going to change? I don't know. Obviously, we know prayer can do amazing things, but we have to change the lives of women. And if we're not even supplying in any way, help to women for them to understand that this is important, that they're being affected by this, that this is, then absolutely, it's absolutely a men's issue. And this is, it's corrupting the family, it's corrupting our children. It's corrupting marital relationships, all of these things. So to sort of try and extract it out as just a male or just a female issue is really laughable because it just shows that somebody
Right.
doesn't understand the structure, the fabric of society at all, and really what is driving abortion. It is absolutely these anti-Marian ideas that is, shout your abortion and making it look glamorous or some sort of rite of passage to be a woman today. So yeah, it's absolutely an issue that I think everybody in the church needs to be aware of.
For sure. And I think what you mentioned earlier too about using that kind of Socratic method, the philosopher in you, encouraging people to get to the root of things, like asking
Yeah.
those deep, thought-provoking questions. Because I think that that's one of my favorite things when I get into any type of like Protestant versus Catholic debate. It's just like
Mhm.
talking about the roots, and that's the beauty of our Catholic faith, right? Is that the roots of it are Jesus Christ. Like the founding is Jesus Himself. And so when you
Yep.
can go back and you can look through the roots of things, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier with just looking at the Bidens and Bernies and feminists of the past and even today who had nothing going on for them, and then they become famous and rich and wealthy and successful based on these ideas. It reminded me of one. It reminds me of BLM as well, because the stories recently of like BLM founders buying $1 million houses and things like
Right.
that.
Right.
And it's
Right.
just, I'm so interested by the fact that people don't ever ask those questions or start to wonder,
Mhm.
this person who's pushing this agenda on me, pushing these ideas, and they seem to be working with all these other people who are getting like really rich off of this stuff. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? It's
Right.
really mind blowing to me. I was talking to my physical therapist yesterday, and we were talking about these liberal cities, and I don't know where she falls. Definitely not conservative, but she kind of sounded like she was somewhere in the middle, but a
Mhm.
little bit more liberal leaning. And she was just telling me about like San Francisco, and she's like, "There's just this stark difference of like really really wealthy people and really really poor people." I'm like, and it's a super Democrat city. You know what I mean? I'm like, you don't ever like question to be like, wait, if these principles, these ideas work, why are
Where's
the
this coming
places?
from?
Yeah,
Right.
like where's the proof of that? And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's a movie that came out on Amazon this year. I tore my Achilles, so I watched a lot of movies in the spring, and me, my fiance, and my mom watched it. I think it's called like a Friday Night in Miami or a Night in Miami or something like that. And it's like
Mhm.
Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and Jim Brown, the football player. And it's
Mhm.
like them like having a conversation in Miami. And one of the deepest parts is Malcolm X is comparing Sam Cooke and saying he's like a sellout and all this stuff. And Sam
Mhm.
Cooke is like, I'm entrepreneurial. I give Black people jobs and opportunities and things like that. He's like, Malcolm X, he's like, you don't ever want the problems to be solved because you make your living off people being mad. He's like,
Yep.
if this ever did go away, he's like, what would you do? Like, this is your whole thing, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yep.
it's interesting to see that today, like I pointed out earlier, of like the AOCs and the people of this world, like how do people not question to
Right.
see,
Right.
like people like Carrie Gress's books getting canceled, and taken
Mhm.
down and banned, and these
Right.
other people who are just freely going by, and
Right.
it just
Well, and that is one of the fascinating elements about it too, is just the fact that the amount of people that are making money off of women because they're broken, because they're constantly broken,
the amount of
even,
men, especially, I think is interesting.
yeah, without a doubt. A lot of bad men benefiting in bad ways. But you also, even just the oral contraceptive industry is, it's just amazing to
Yeah,
me how much money has been poured into magazines because of that. I always joke, like, imagine if like an NFP group, is supporting our work. It'd be laughable. Like, okay, we got to sell a lot of like baby stickers, whatever the chart stickers are, like that.
right.
Those aren't the margins that you're going to make billions of dollars. And yet that's what, where they've got their audience that's also selling their product, but it breaks them and promotes, all this disruption in the family. And then it just keeps perpetuating itself. It's all connected to abortion. And again, you can see this constant breaking of women because the benefits financially are just so significant, across the board. And it's even chronicled. I talk about it in my book that there's these concerted efforts to make sure that we keep breaking women. They feel very discontent and malcontent. The whole role of envy and jealousy. All of those things are really at work, and not just accidental, but very, very intentionally put in these places to just exacerbate the worst aspects of womanhood and break us at the heart of who we are, which is ultimately, virgins and mothers. This is what God calls us to be. This is the natural way through which He makes us holy. But if you can destroy both of those, then what have you got? Completely decimated civilization. And that's also where you see the difference, or I'm sorry, the similarities between BLM. I mean, that's one of their stated, they might have taken it down by now. I heard it was taken down, but
Yeah, they did
one of
remove
their
it.
very stated principles was the destruction of the nuclear family. So it's all the exact same kind of, let's make a lot of money off of breaking people kind of tactics that
Right.
we've seen for a long time.
it's like these like sleazy salesmen, it's like how I
Right.
kind of think of politicians and some like big pharma
Yeah.
and a lot of these people. And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting going back to like the San Francisco example of the people who are like against the man, against all these things,
Hmm.
or the same people who were like so pro government lockdowns that ended up putting all this money back
Yeah.
into the billionaires' pockets and things like that,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it's also backwards to think about, how skeptical we get of like, that person that's at the kiosk in the mall trying to sell you
Right.
something that you don't
Right.
need. But then if
Right.
your doctor or the government tells you you need to take birth control, you need to get an abortion, you need to take this vaccine, you need to do whatever, and there's
Yep.
billions of dollars being profited
Right.
off of you,
Right.
people are just like, okay,
Yeah.
just immediately
No,
like,
and I think actually that's a really interesting point. This is one of the things that, I really saw this gap um, of women's content for Catholics. And this is really where Theology of Home came from, was this idea, like, we know that they use magazines to promote their ideas and spread their lies throughout the culture. What if we used that magazine style to sort of do the same thing with very attractive imagery, compelling women, compelling kind of narratives going on in the book. And it's been just a really fun project because I think women are really soaking it up. We love magazines, but it's just been great to put in it. How do we put in these books? The forbidden pictures. The very competent looking dad. Pregnant women, large
right.
families. Nobody looks like a doormat. There's just so it's been interesting to try and see, like, why haven't we done that before? There's 35 million women, Catholic women in the United States. 35 million. That's almost the population of Canada. And we don't have one women's magazine that's like at the checkout stand. So the fact that we've left these huge holes where we don't offer women a way out of this, I think that's kind of on us. We need to start doing things that help women figure out how to get out of this. And so we've actually started a line of products that are lifestyle products that have been great. And I get a lot of pushback like, oh, you're just making money off of the church. Like, okay, first of all, anybody that started a business knows that it takes a long time to actually make money. Second of all, this
Yeah.
is a ministry, and so much of it just goes right back into the company, either with its growth or paying for what the work that we're doing. But even if you put all of that aside, the fact of the matter is that I am now presenting, we have candles and all kinds of charcuterie boards and hand towels and aprons and all kinds of things that I can give to women that they can give to their friends, that are conveying the faith in a way that you're not going to do with just secular products, but they're beautiful and compelling. And I have great stories. One woman gave one of our candles, she had it blessed, and then gave it to her really radically feminist sister-in-law. And the next time she went to the sister-in-law's home, there was the candle with an image of Our Lady behind it. And this woman was blown away. Like, this is the most radically feminist woman, that I
Wow.
know. Now she has a picture of Mary in her home. So it's an important thing that, Europe got this, medieval Europe got this. This is why Europe is gorgeous. This is why everybody wants to go to Europe, because it's stunning in architecture and art and all of these things. So we have 2,000 years of art and beauty in the church, and then
Right.
we don't have a single magazine or lifestyle brand. So these are really the holes that my colleague Noelle Maring and I have been striving to fill. There's no Catholic Joanna Gaines. There's maybe 2 or 3 different Catholic lifestyle blogs, but they're not big enough to really have the kind of influence that that you see secularly. So, and the secular crowd is actually so afraid of the LGBT movement too, that they won't put things that are Catholic on there very often on their own sites too. So it's this really odd dynamic
Right.
where I don't think we realize the power of merchandising and branding and all of that, and we're so busy sort of saying, oh, you're making money off of the church, but ignoring these really huge blind spots and problematic areas in the rest of the culture, and not seeing it as evangelical effort in its entirety and how it can actually help women. So anyway, it's been a great learning experience to sort of see just a lot of these ossified ideas that we have, almost as like Protestants, where we think the body is bad, we think material is bad, and kind of missing the boat altogether of what we could be doing to share our faith with these beautiful things in our homes.
Right, absolutely. It's I think one of the most frustrating things in the church is, as Orthodox Catholics and lovers of tradition, it's so easy, and I think people so quickly go into this extreme, like, well, now because we love those things of the past, we have to dig ourselves in and not
Right.
move or change or adapt at all. You know,
Yeah.
like the
Right.
thing
Right.
that over
There's
all these
that sort of
years,
pendulum swing. Yeah.
yeah,
And it's
it's an
actually funny. I think
extremism.
it's, well, and I think we have, a lot of people have to sort of go through that phase of, where you're, it's the pendulum swings so far that you have to sort of go through that phase where you're purging yourself of these things. And then you sort of come back to the middle, like, okay, how do I embrace these things in a healthy way? But it takes a while. I mean, it's certainly a sign, I think, of spiritual maturity when you can, um, feel like you don't have to take that sort of Protestant route, by thinking that the body is bad and things are bad, and
Right.
um, but to sort of see it in a balanced way, but also see just how the faith is shared and spread. It's, the material is important. Think about a dinner, breaking of bread, sharing of wine, all of that facilitates conversation, and joy and conviviality, all those great things that happen with hospitality. And, it doesn't have to be some luxurious meal, but it sure helps when you have things that taste good and people are enjoying themselves. And
Right.
we work hard to do that. And so I think that there's all these different ways that we can do that among our home, but also, as we're always giving gifts to people, being really thoughtful in the gifts that we can give, instead of that plastic piece of Jesus junk that was made by slave labor in China. There was a
Right.
lot of that. So
Exactly.
anyway, yeah, there's I think a lot of widening a perspective that we have our work cut out to do in terms of just helping, women in their vocation as moms, and as whether they're working at home or working outside the home, or a single woman, like, to help women sort of live that vocation as a woman. I think that's a really important calling and something that's also been neglected. So yeah, we've got a lot of work ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, and we hear that, working for Hallow now,
Mhm.
just hear similar things sometimes, especially as they were getting started. I think that those comments have really died off. The question about, like, you're making people pay for prayer and all these different
Right,
things,
right,
right?
yeah.
And I'm so interested, especially in the conservatives in those groups who say that, because it's like in
Mhm.
every other area, in your voting and all these other stances you
Right,
have, you're like so pro capitalism because you recognize the goodness that it creates, the high value that it creates, the end products, right? Like, why
mhm,
America is a front runner in all these different industries because of our capitalistic society, right?
right.
Because the innovation and things like that come out of that. But somehow in the church, no, let's just stay in the Stone
Everything has
Ages.
to be free,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
everything's free,
yep,
so it can be the
yep,
worst app in the world, and so it can be low quality, and nobody wants to use it except for the
yep,
60-year-old women who are already gonna pray. You know what I mean?
right,
Like, so
exactly.
it reaches
Like,
nobody, and it's like, I don't
mhm,
understand why people get so entrenched in that. It's like, you're so pro capitalism, but then if somebody's trying to do something
right,
that's innovative, that's still orthodox and authentically
yeah,
Catholic, we have to tear
yeah,
them down. And I remember, like, in the Catholic ministries I've worked for, I remember Matthew Kelly specifically saying, he's like, all of our biggest enemies or critics or whatever you want to say are Catholics. Like, it's
yeah.
always
No, I think
it's
that's
so
true.
often self-sabotage, you
Yeah,
know?
total self-sabotage, exactly. So, yeah, the sense of, I don't get it, I don't understand why we need Catholic products. Well, look at Europe. Look at how it evangelizes. Look at what beauty does. These are, I think, bigger questions that, as utilitarian, Americans, it's just important to sort of widen that scope and say that cinder block church is just not. We can see the difference between a cinder block church and a gorgeous, brick or marble or, travertine, whatever. There's so many. A church can speak to us in different ways based on the material and the craftsmanship and whatnot. And I think that those are important things that we have to keep drawing out, that it's not, there's a big distinction between luxury and beauty. Luxury is self, aggrandizing self, it's about turning things into the self, or whether it's pleasure or pride. Beauty is something that draws us out of ourselves. And those are the things that I think we need to help people see, that distinction, that this isn't, we're not all meant to be paupers. And that there's something very important about putting beautiful things around us, whether it's our homes or gift giving, or certainly in our churches.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very beautifully put. Thank you for sharing that. All right, my last question for you. I know we're getting over time here already, but is you're a mother of five. Obviously, I don't know your breakdown of boy to girl, but I would guess in there's a girl.
2 girls, 3 boys. Yep.
2 girls, 3 boys. So what is your advice? Like, what are you doing now as you're
Mhm.
raising women in today's society? What's kind of
Yeah.
your advice or perspective on that?
I mean, one of the things I didn't do it intentionally because I didn't really think about it, but my daughters know well the distinction between the anti-Mary and the Mary, and Our Lady. That's I think just something that's just part of being in our family, because of the research that I do, and they see my work, they see my TV shows and things like that. But the big thing I think that really has been important is just our family rosary, which I know sounds incredibly challenging to people. We started doing this when my daughter was probably 1, and she just would kind of play, and then eventually, I think when she was about 3, she started praying the rosary with us, and it's kind of been the same with all of our kids. It's now I have an 18-month-old. He walks in circles actually, and his older brother walks behind him during the rosary now, and but everybody knows how to pray the rosary. They know at 8:30, that's when the rosary is. And I think that the real key is to don't waffle on that. If kids know that there's an option and there's a way to get out of it and around it, it's like anything, they're going to complain and they're not going to want to do it. But if as parents, you're like, this is just when our family prays the rosary, doesn't matter who's here, what's going on. We're going to carve out time for it. And, obviously there's those situations where sometimes we have to do it in the car, or, other things come up. But I'm just amazed to see the development of the spiritual life in my own children. My 12-year-old, she's just on those, early teen years. And
Yeah.
I'm sure she will go through all of these different phases. But, last week I dropped her off at our church. She'd asked, I had to go run an errand. She's like, can I just go to church for a while? And she went into adoration and to mass while I ran the other kids somewhere else. And anyway, it was just one of those things where I was like, I would never have done that at 12.
Right. Yeah.
Voluntarily asked to go to church. So anyway, I think that there are fruits of the rosary that just, it's just beyond reason in terms of what's happening in each soul through that. And that's just a basic thing that I think you can do. That's once you get in the habit of it, it's really easy, and it affects everybody. The whole dynamic and fabric of the family is really strengthened by it. The other thing, of course, modesty is always an issue. And I think we really always frame it in terms of what we can't do. I think I received this great advice recently from a stylist who said, why don't we point to the things that we get to do and what happens when you are a beautifully dressed woman, Audrey Hepburn styling. Like everybody loves Audrey Hepburn. Everybody wants to be like Audrey Hepburn. She's just so timeless and so beautiful. And yet modesty was obviously such a part of who she was. Why can we not start looking at it in terms of like, what happens when we don't objectify ourselves, and what happens when we're not focusing on our bodies as overtly sexual, or even just, kind of mindlessly. Like I think a lot of women don't really think about the effect that our comportment has upon men. And that's something we have to be mindful of. We can't just neglect men and say, well, it's your problem. There's nothing Christian about that.
Right.
But what happens when we turn that on its head and say, if we're surrounded by all these virtuous, beautiful women, what's going to happen with the culture? And we know what will happen. I mean, Fulton Sheen has talked about this. He's got this great quote that I will butcher. But his basic point is that, the level of a society can be measured by the comportment and the character of the women of that culture, because men will try to reach up for that instead of groveling. They
Right.
want that kind of stretch. So anyway, I think that's a really important piece that needs to be gifted to our daughters, and we have to understand it ourselves before we can even pass that along. But certainly it's a hard one to figure out. But again, that's really, like you were saying with your own experience, that's where prayer and the Holy Spirit can lead us in ways and kind of open up these new ways of thinking about these that are compelling, and then we see the fruit of them. So yeah, those are the 3 things that I'm really focused on in our family at this point.
I love it. That's great. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. You're doing some difficult work that not many people want to do, but it's super necessary. And I know that
Somebody's got to do it.
that's right. Exactly. If not you, then who? And so beautiful to get to talk with you today, and just awesome to get to hear all the great things that you're doing. Super grateful for the book. Yeah, it's meant a lot to us. And I know to so many people around the country and around the world. And so thank you for writing that. I hope you continue to write. I'm excited for your upcoming projects and everything that you've got going on. I think it's going to be a great blessing to the church and therefore the world.
Well, thank you so much. Really a joy to join you today, Nathan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Know that we'll be praying for you and everything. And I hope everybody that's listening today will go and check it out. We will definitely link it in the show notes so you can go and click on that link to find the book on Amazon and definitely check it out, read it, check out Carrie's work. I will also link your Instagram handle and everything here in the show notes, and highly encourage everybody to just go check out this great work. It's one of my favorite books. I'm pretty sure everybody's listened to the podcast habitually has heard me talk about it no less than 12 times. So you know that I think it's fire. So definitely go check it out. God bless.